Let me just welcome on my last two speakers, Nicolas Russell, from the CEO of We Are Pop, and Jonathan Luff, the co-founder of Epsilon Advisory Partners, please. So this will be the short panel, but it's kind of the wrap up. And again, I would rather not wait for questions. I'd rather you pop up and, sorry, no pun intended, and ask questions as you find them. It's been a really nice panel. So the panels have been informative for me, even someone who lives and breathes tech. So let me, the last, it's on towards a data-driven economy, and this is something both near and dear to the hearts of both of you gentlemen. So I actually want to start with an audience question. I was talking to Jonathan earlier about this, and the question was, how willing are you to be with your healthcare data, to share your healthcare data? Would you be willing, hands up, would you be willing to share your healthcare data on a mass kind of sovereign scale if there could be great insights yielded? So like what's that, 10%?
That's kind of disappointing.
About 10% maybe?
Yeah.
How do you react to that? And give me your argument why we should.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, and I don't think that's unusual necessarily to see that kind of reaction. But the idea here was really to try and look at the way we can unlock the potential of digital. And I think we have to look back at recent past. In the UK, obviously, we had some sort of mishandling of this issue around the pooling, the sharing of personal healthcare data. But if I can ask the audience a second question, which is, how many people here would immunize their children?
Good question. How many of you? Still not half.
So I'm kind of amazed by that, frankly, given the impact that immunization has had on global healthcare. But the way I like to think about some of these technology challenges, particularly if you look at health tech, is that by pooling personal data, you achieve a scale which is simply not possible in small countries, in small communities, down at the level of the individual physician with an individual patient. And if you are able to make personalized healthcare data available at scale and to manage some of the privacy challenges that come with that, then the opportunity to tackle rare and serious disease is really significant. And that brings us to some of the points that some of your other contributors are making.
We keep talking about privacy. How do we protect our data?
Could I have one more go at that
Sure,
before maybe Nick jumps in? Because I think it's really important that we earn trust through giving people things that they actually value. And we can get into all sorts of sort of very technical discussions about consent, and there were some very, very good points made in the previous panels. But people trust things that they use regularly, that they value, that they see tangible value from. And you see people continuing to use, despite some of the controversies around the way in which some companies use personal data. Was it Stephen up here on the last panel? Obviously, right at the heart of some of these debates. But they are still the world's most used social network. And I think last weekend we saw just by the safety check feature that was enabled, a real kind of tangible example of how the data that Facebook has access to can be made usable and useful to its users.
Nick, weigh in on this discussion.
When I think about data, I think about the opportunity if we put it all together. So obviously we're a startup, and I look at a lot of data. Our site alone, we get 5,000 visitors a day. From those turn into about 1,000 users who make 250 property inquiries, who each then have 50 to 100 variables all along their user journey, what properties they're looking at. We're an unmentioned hotel platform for retail, by the way. So when we look at all this data, it is only useful in the aggregate. And talk about disintermediation. For us, we're in the retail property industry. We enable people to do pop-up shops, which is retail by the day. And it's only useful when you disintermediate the agent, and an agent is a one-to-one relationship. We have a many-to-many relationship to where we can actually start making recommendations of what retailers should be in what areas, and it only works at scale. And then I think the scale comes from, obviously, London is good scale, Britain is better. EU is even better. And so from my perspective, I just see the advantages of having all of this data together so that we can actually, for example, move small retailers who are paying £1,000 or €1,000 for a week. We can actually start moving them into Paris. So right now they can't do it because they don't know where to go and they don't have enough data, but on aggregate, we can use that data to actually produce better commercial and social outcomes. And I think that's my platform.
Your point's well taken. Does it matter where physically your data is stored? Does this become a barrier to your growth? Does it become just an extra expense? How does data location matter to you, either one of you, as you're dealing with big data?
So our platform, it used to take you 45 minutes to build your profiles and do everything else until we added the social networks, so Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. All of our data is stored in the EU and it's compliant, yet now our customers absolutely rave about the fact they can create a profile in a minute, but now it's all backlinked to the US, and so.
So backlink to the US, what does that mean? Did the safe harbor do anything, the dissolution of safe harbor?
It means that we store all the data we collect in Europe.
And now you have to relying on your subcontractors, basically,
on the platforms.
The platform.
So they store the data in the US, and so we're compliant.
But they're not.
We have to engage with them because if you think about it, if you cut it off, for example, we're looking at launching in China, where none of these platforms are available, and you're back to square one.
How does that affect your company's liability if you're compliant but your provider's not, and they're not?
It means that not directly for us because we're compliant within the framework, but what it means is anything that happens to them has a knock-on effect on us. So to the point about building platforms around this data, any change that's made to how Google, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter has to store data, if features are removed, if there are additional consents involved, that will have a knock-on effect down to us because that's the data we're actually building our platform around.
Okay. Let me just ask the audience, has anyone in the audience had to make a change because of the end of safe harbor? One. All right, you?
Yeah, no, these are sort of interesting theoretical issues. But the question for me always, data is becoming it's just a commodity.
It is until it gets stolen.
Okay, but these things, things will happen from time to time. As somebody said on the panel earlier about the 4 categories of user that they work with, there will, I guess I fall into the third of those 4 categories in that I am much more optimistic about the potential of these products and services, and I'm therefore willing to accept that there is a risk. Now, it's better if I understand the degree of that risk and what's likely to happen if something goes wrong. But I value the upside much more greatly than I fear the downside. Now, I think what you will have is that, yes, you can regulate. It was interesting to see the audience reaction earlier, frankly, to the question about where do you want your data stored. No one cared as long as it was in Europe. There is clearly a Europe-US divide in people's minds. And the question there then becomes, why is that? Does it come down to the issues of the last couple of years around the activities of states in this area? But you're likely to have service providers actively trying to address those questions for consumers. If companies are doing what they should, and I'm sure Nick would echo this, they're focusing on their users. They're trying to provide a service which means something to their users. If in Europe users want to have their data accessible to them, highly adaptable, providing kinds of services that Nick and his team offer, then companies will adapt to offer that in a way that works for their users. And the US will then need to respond, or US companies will then need to respond in ways that meet that challenge. This is still, or it has the potential to be, the world's biggest market. That's what we're still talking about here. Okay, we've still got a distance to go to establish the full digital single market, but it's still the world's biggest single market. And companies all around the world will compete for users in this market. I don't, frankly, subscribe to the view that you need to overly prescribe, you need to over-regulate. You can allow companies to respond to their users.
Did you want to?
Well, I'm talking about responding to your users. So in New York last week, I was part of a panel or a session that was taking UK startups to the US, mainly for funding. And one thing that they brought up that was interesting was that in Europe, you're bound mainly by regulatory environments, whereas in the US, you're open to litigation. And so they said, in terms of the controls that exist, you have to do a gear shift here. Because here you're not compliant because you have to be, otherwise you get a fine. Here you're compliant because there can be a class action suit.
In the US.
In the US, and you'll be attacked. And what it got me thinking about just in preparation for today was there are numerous levers that can be used. And I would say from the entrepreneur side, and back to what you're talking about, is if you regulate it, what you can potentially do is squash the innovation. In terms of like in the US, like do it. And if you do something wrong, then you're going to get sued, and that's a huge liability. Whereas if we back off too far on this side, you're not going to get the innovation that springs out of people just literally throwing data together and seeing what happens.
Well, it's interesting on the last panel to hear, I think it was Stephen, talk about, I just want my refrigerator to work. I don't want to have to.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's like how much do we actually? We always talk about we're not even aware about how much data we're sharing on such a regular basis.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about.
I think these companies take it very seriously. So we've done some work with Nest. Mm-hmm. Nest is the smart thermostat company, and that allows you to save energy. And it is taking in data from the wider world. It's taking in temperature data. It's taking in environmental data, and it's taking in how much you interact with the device and how much activity there is in your home. And that's quite a lot of data to collect, and it's in your home. They take that exceptionally seriously. It is the absolute. It is the number one priority for them to make sure that the data of that household is protected, so that it is not released to any third party, and they do maintain absolutely strict controls over it. But they walk their customers through a customer journey. They want their customers to understand what the benefits are, and they want them to understand what needs to be collected in data terms in order to deliver the saving. Now, when you can then show the saving, when the customer actually does reduce their energy bill, or does get, in some US states, a rebate check from their utility, having signed into a program, it's meaningful. And then they've earned that trust over time, and then they continue to do business.
Okay, we're almost at it. We basically are out of time. But so let me ask the last question, which is, for each of you, what is the big number one, only one change on the EU level that could make EU a more data-driven economy?
You go first.
No.
The biggest change.
One change, only one.
Okay, well, I'm afraid this is in danger of being a rather sort of general comment rather than a specific one. I apologize for that. I'd just like to see open doors in EU institutions to innovators and entrepreneurs. I would like to see...
Open doors and what's it, access?
I'd like to see access. I would like all EU officials just to publish their diaries, so that you can see who they meet rather than regulate who they meet. Well, I know you would. I'd share that view. If therefore people have an issue with who they're meeting or what they're discussing, then you can raise it with them. I'd just like to see much greater access for people with innovative ideas, creative ideas, and rather than having this situation at the moment where everything is a bit captured by the incumbents.
Transparency, love it. Nick?
Well, being a startup, obviously it's always funding. Funding. But in terms of...
But you're not looking to the EU for funding. You're still, it's still, I assume.
Well, no, I just mean for a data-driven economy.
Okay.
It's funding to build scale and to build data-driven startups like ours. And the other thing that I would like to see, it is very easy to build an advanced startup in the UK because of the amount of open government data. And actually, that's been a very interesting point for a lot of our property technology startups, which is you can trust it because it has the government doing essentially the access control and doing the accountability, but you have access to it. And if we saw, because one of the things we see now is now that we're starting to go into other EU countries, we don't have access to the same level of data, and whether that's property or just general data transparency. And the fastest way you can build a startup is, to go around the entire what are we collecting and have the government aggregate it and then give it to startups to use.
Interesting. I'm sorry we're out of time. Any questions from the audience, though, before I I know everybody is hot and thirsty, so I hope you'll join us for a drink and continue this dynamic conversation outside. Thank my panelists here, and thank you all, and thank Telefonica for sponsoring this event. Thanks.